I get it, you've probably been waiting for the Sony a7R since last year, but would you settle for the a7R5? Apparently, it's got better video specs than the a7S III, FX3, and Alpha One combined. This and more after the intro. Thanks for tuning in to The Ordinary Filmmaker. Please like and subscribe this video. Now, the more likes I get, this tells me that this is the type of subject that you want me to cover more often. And one more thing before I get into the news. Don't forget about my night challenge. I've got details in this video here, but essentially, you could win a Zhiyun Weebill-S gimbal and an Ordinary Filmmaker baseball cap, this one here, for participating in this challenge. It's essentially a contest to get you outside shooting at night. Shoot the moon, shoot the stars, shoot street life, shoot a scene of your choice, or try and replicate a scene from your favorite movie or TV show. The contest ends May the 14th, and Jordan Drake will be announcing the winner from 5 videos that I'll be selecting. And now for the news. This news came out Thursday, Friday, and I really didn't see the need to publish it because I didn't really think it was all that accurate. But as I thought about it more and more, I woke up this morning realizing, yeah, there is a story here, but there's a huge caveat, and I really need to address this up front first. Now, Sony Rumors and Sony Alpha Rumors have both published this video. But Sony Alpha Rumors went a step further and said that this information hasn't been validated, that it was found on Chinese social media, translated, and there's no indication anywhere whatsoever whether this has been validated or vetted in any way, and is most likely just conjecture that someone has come up with. And there are points within these specifications that I'm going to point out where it kind of points to this not being all that valid. Anyhow, enough of that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the specs and see what you make of it. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this. Right, so the first set of specs is going to use the same sensor as in the Sony a7R4. It's going to use that 61 megapixel sensor. It's also going to have the Bionz XR processor. An ISO range, 40 to 81,920. And the autofocus on this camera is going to be very good. It's like any other Sony's. I think Sony and Canon produce the best autofocus system. It's reliable and it's trustworthy. It's going to have 759 points, but what I really like here is that, well, they're going to have eye autofocus, not just human eye autofocus, not just bird eye autofocus, but essentially all animals. If it's got an eye, this camera is going to lock onto it. Now, I've been shooting with the R5 for the better part of a year now, and I got to tell you, being able to lock onto insects and other animals, dogs, cats, is a great benefit. So I'm really looking forward to this capability coming out. This one makes an awful lot of sense. And regardless of how accurate this rumor is, I expect to see this capability in all future Sony cameras. Okay, so in APS-C mode, this will be capable of delivering 26 megapixels. I seem like I'm competing with this bird up here. I think, can you guys hear him? He's awfully loud. I feel like I'm raising my voice just to keep up with him. All right, let's get back to the specs. Now, in terms of stills mode, it can shoot up to 10 frames per second continuous. Now, I don't know if this is mechanical or electronic, but when we look at other cameras that are out there, like the Sony Alpha One, 10 frames per second isn't that great, and it's pretty mediocre. And I'm not saying it's bad. I think anything above 7 frames per second is good enough for most of us when we're doing fast action type stuff. But when we get to look at the video specs, you're going to see how the video specs seem to be that much better, and the photo specs seem to be, kind of like whoever came up with these specs, or developed these leaked rumors, was a video person. Oh, and IBIS, 5.5 stops. Now, let's get into the video specs. Now, I'm using my laptop here because there's so many specs here, I can't keep them all in my head, and I'm not using a teleprompter today. And please, I hope my neighbors aren't too loud for you. I'm going to keep recording anyhow, and hopefully the Tascam does its job admirably. All right, now this is where things get rather interesting, and hopefully, am I starting to get a little bit exposed here? Okay, so a little bit of a backstory here. The weather's been absolutely crazy in the last couple of hours. It's gone from really, really dark clouds to when I initially set up to now the sun's poking through. And I can see from the Ninja that my face looks pretty good, but things are starting to heat up a little bit. But I'm going to keep going, and if it does get a little bit overexposed, I do apologize, but this stuff is really good, and I don't want to keep getting up and changing the ND filter. Okay, so now let's take a look at the video specs. This is quite staggering. It's going to have full frame oversampling at 8K 24 and 4K 24. Now, I suspect what they really mean to say is it's going to do full sensor output at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. Now, this sensor, again, it's the same one that's in the A7R4, is 9,500 pixels by 6,300. So that would make it 9.5K oversampled 8K. The Alpha 1 only had 8.6K oversampled 8K. Of course, the A7S3, it didn't have any whatsoever. So this is quite staggering. Now, in Super 35 mode, it can do oversampling in 4K up to 30 frames per second. And let's take a look at Super 35 in full frame. It didn't say whether it would go up to 120 frames per second, 240 frames per second. There's an awful lot missing here. And is it also going to deliver full sensor output at 9.5K oversampled? Okay, this is where things start to fall down for me. Let's take a look at the next bullet. 1.24 times crop mode in 4K 60. So wait a minute. This camera is capable of 9.5K oversampled 8K, but it can't do 60 frames per second in 4K without cropping it at 1.24? Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't to me. I mean, 60 frames per second in 4K, come on. Like the Canon R5 can do 120 frames per second, 120 frames per second in 4K without cropping the living daylights out of it. So that's why I'm kind of, this is where it starts to fall apart for me. These video specs are almost too good, but then, you know, it comes and starts offering cropped mode in 4K 60, and it doesn't even talk about 120 frames per second or 180 or 240. So let's keep going because there's some more good ones here. Now, in terms of encoding, it's going to do 10-bit 422, and that really shouldn't be any surprise. It's going to do XAVC, HS, S, and SI, and it's going to have multiple creative modes, including S-Cinetone. So there's good news there. Now, as far as the EVFs goes, it's going to use 9.44 million dots, and the flip LCD, it's going to use the new one, 2.36 million pixels flip LCD. Now, I don't know if it's going to flip this way or if it's going to be a fully articulating flip screen. It doesn't say. All right, let's keep going. It's going to have dual card slots. No surprise there. It's going to be dual CF Express Type A and SD, both in one. That's really good. And we should be getting some cheaper cards coming shortly. I think it's ProGrade that's going to be coming out. 3 cards are supposed to be coming out this month, and that'll be really great for Sony Alpha customers. It's also going to produce 10-bit HEIF images, which is really good. But for video folks, because you know you're going to want to put a Ninja on this, especially the Ninja 5 Plus, it doesn't have a full-size HDMI port, but it doesn't say if it's getting a silly little micro port that the R5 does. That thing is just, when you plug it in, it just doesn't feel very tight. I mean, Canon, you put some ports on this thing that most of us aren't going to use, but a full-size HDMI port? Come on. And give you an idea of how flimsy this is in the kit, they give you a little bracket that you screw onto the side and you put the HDMI cable in just to help keep it secure so you don't bend it or anything. It's just, anyhow, so enough of that. This is not about the R5. And as you can see from the exposure here, the clouds are back. We're under some thick and heavy clouds. My face looks pretty good, so I really do hope this is exposed properly. The Ninja 5 is a great and useful tool for exposing because of it, you know, using things such as false colors, which I'm using now. But here's the problem. I'm behind the camera. I can't keep getting up all the time, and so I don't have anybody behind the camera to micro adjust the exposure as needed. Okay, so this sounds like a pretty good camera. The video specs are really, really good, but again, there's a lot missing here. There's a lot of details that can really help shed light on if this is accurate or not. What I found impressive about this is the number of items in this rumor, yet how vague some of them were when it's not something you would want vague, like the oversampled 8K. Well, is it 9.5 times oversampled? Is it 9 times oversampled 8K? And what about 4K? Full sensor, that would tell us the same thing. It's like 9 or 9.5K oversampled 4K. The details missing. The frames per second, what can it do in slow motion? And I'm sorry, but 60 frames per second in 4K with a 1.24 times crop? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of that. I almost left Canon because of their 1.7 times crop. I don't want to deal with crops anymore, not in this type of camera and in this price range. Well, what is the price, you might be asking? Well, this camera is going to sell for $3,500 US or 3,800 euros. But what do you think? What do you think of this camera? Do you think this is real? Or like me, do you feel like there's so many holes in this that it doesn't hold water? That's where I'm kind of at. But to me, this video is not about talking about an upcoming camera that Sony's going to be releasing this month. It's more about a conversation, water cooler talk, to get us having in a discussion and engagement of what we expect next from Sony. I really do expect the a7 IV to be the next camera coming out, not the a7R5. And what were those two previous cameras, the a7R IV-A? I mean, they just did a minor update. Why would you do the a7 IV-A, which they've announced, they're out there, and then a few months later come out with the a7R5? Yeah, this to me is not realistic, and I wish it was. There's so little coming out in terms of Sony. And I love Sony. Sony makes great cameras, especially with exposure right now. I'm using the Ninja 5, and the Ninja 5 is doing a great job. I can look up at the monitor, and I can see how well I'm exposed. But I really wish the R5 had the same capability that the Sony cameras do, where as it's focused on me, autofocus, it will keep me exposed properly regardless of what's going on in the rest of the frame. It doesn't force me into evaluative. And that's what I love about Sony, the ZV-1, the a7S III. I really love what Sony does with their cameras. And yes, they don't have the high bit rates that Canon does. But if you're a one-person show and you're constantly in front of the camera instead of being behind it, that exposure to the subject, I think, is a really huge plus. And that's kind of a bit of my rant in this. Well, I guess I'm doing it behind the scenes without announcing behind the scenes. This is my first time shooting outside with the Ninja 5. Well, the petals are starting to fall from the tree, so hopefully my autofocus didn't latch onto one of those. It does sometimes. I think exposure is very important, and I think the R5 does a very, very good job. But you know, a few software controls to copy what Sony does, I think it would make it a whole lot better, because I still find that I'm fighting with the camera when I'm shooting outside, especially in a situation like this where I can see there's bright sun over there, and before long it's going to be over top of me. And if you've been watching this entire video, you can see how the exposure has changed just a little bit. It is what it is. I do wish I had the Sony a7S III as a secondary camera. I really do, and maybe someday I will, but the channel's just a little bit too small for that. But what do you think of this news? Do you think this is valid? Does this make sense to you? What do you think is the next Sony camera coming out? And what do you think about this new rivalry between Sony and Canon? Just seems like a few years ago that rivalry was between Nikon and Canon. But you hardly ever hear about Nikon and Canon being talked in the same sentence. It's all about Sony now and what Sony is doing, how they're still continuing to shake up the market. But this year, 2021, and next year, 2022, I expect to see some really impressive, highly capable, highly innovative cameras from not just Sony, but also Canon. I think that we're going to see some really amazing stuff this year. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for your chance to win 2 Angelbird 128GB AV Pro MK2 V90 SD cards, along with an Angelbird Dual SD card reader. Or you could also win a Ulanzi LED light package with accent lights, underwater lights, and various flat panel lights to help light your subject. There's a great starter kit for starting your own channel. And if you'd like to help support the Ordinary Filmmaker channel without spending any money, well, use my affiliate links down below to B&H and Amazon US and UK. And the great thing is you don't pay any extra, and I get 2% back from every purchase to help support the channel. Or you can purchase an Ordinary Filmmaker baseball cap for $34.99 at ordinaryfilmmaker.com. Thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. We'll see you again soon.